Thank you for being here for this very important announcement. You're all here to hear about the lottery winner, right?
Yes.
You guys are no fun on Tuesday morning. All right. What? It's you. It's like, we had a press pool and you win coming to more press conferences. You're welcome. And I want to make sure everyone can hear me because I'm going to keep my mask on and I'm going to continue to promote, and we'll keep every tool, as I've been mentioning, about COVID safe, and particularly with the Delta variant. So you're here because we want to announce an incredible transition and leadership shift in Children, Youth, and the Families Department. And I want to talk a little bit about that department. I can't think of a single time, whether I was a cabinet secretary or in law school, or involved in any other public service environment in this state, or working with people all across the United States. These departments are critical to the well-being of children and handle some of the most challenging issues by far than any other department in this state, and I think that that's fair to say of any other state. In making decisions about that department, in 2019, we had 3 critical issues on top of a breadth of other high-risk situations. Number 1, when we took over, by far, most of the cases were not being handled in a productive or in a framework that means that they were getting resolved within a statutory time frame or a time frame that really means that you've mitigated risk for those kids. We were behind in ways that are even hard to describe, including we weren't able to answer phone calls out of the 1st District, and you might remember, or Albuquerque. I refer to it as the Congressional District. Many of you in this room might remember that before the inauguration, but during the transition, I wrote a letter to then Governor Martinez alerting her to information in our transition work that we had uncovered about the lack of ability to manage the phone calls for complaints, to respond to those allegations, and to investigate those issues of abuse. So long-standing problem, 95% of those issues are being timely investigated and timely decisions made. So you go from the opposite, where 95% weren't being handled, to now 95% are. We're incredibly proud of that. Second big problem, that our vacancy rates, right, 23 plus percent, I think higher than that, 27% vacancy rate in your frontline protective services workers, which translates right back to the fact that you don't have anybody to answer those phone calls or to do those investigations. If you can't do that, there is no way this department can meet its obligation to keep our kiddos and our families safe. Can't do it. All right? I'm happy and incredibly proud to report that during this administration, we have by 50% reduced those vacancies and are well on our way, as that's a priority. As you all know, the pandemic hasn't made it easy for us to have folks in a variety of training and related positions all across the state, and we're going to continue to do that until we have, my goal, 0 vacancies in frontline workers, with a pool of folks who can come in for vacations, sick leave, and related shifts. That really has to happen. Quite frankly, it needs to happen in our public health departments as well. And we've done some incredible new things, right? We have kinship care, which is not new, but we weren't utilizing it. I can tell you that we've increased that by double digits. I can also tell you that our extended foster care, we have 160 participants. This is a state that when you turned 18, whether you were ready to be on your own or not, you were on your own. That is no longer the case in this state, and we're seeing that program really make a difference. We are seeing that we are trending in the right direction. We're above 6 points. That's to 2019. Before 2019, we were at about 31% of kids living in poverty in New Mexico. We were at 25. That's the shift that we ought to be seeing, and we believe that those numbers are going to continue to dramatically improve. That's the biggest indicator of risk for children and families in this state is poverty and extreme poverty. We are addressing that, and probably the most important, at least for me, all of those are critical to any success in this department. But this is a state because the last administration eradicated any behavioral health, including for kids, including for seriously mentally ill kiddos and their families. All those kids are being served out of state. That means there's no family relationships. That means we're not building a system. That means that we're not preventing or mitigating. We're not developing the expertise. By and large, all of those kids are now being treated by a very sophisticated, multi-dimensional, multi-provider pool so that those kids can stay here, can succeed here, and get every aspect of behavioral mental health support that they need. So those are some highlights. And I appreciate that Deputy Secretary Locke and so many others at that department have really delivered. Now I've given you a glimpse of the toughest department. I am very proud and incredibly honored. I think this might be the first, what do I call you? Secretary Justice, Justice Secretary, Justice Secretary Designate, Justice Judge. I don't think that's ever happened in the state of New Mexico, and I don't think it's happened around the country. And why is it critical? Well, Justice Barbara Vigil is a homegrown, incredible native New Mexican from a long-standing, incredible family who's really clear about both the benefits and opportunities of the state and its risks. She's got 3 decades of experience in child advocacy, on the bench, and as a district court judge handled over 16,000 cases. And in her work, not just in overseeing the children's court, but in addition, did justice panels, which were dedicated to really dealing with juvenile justice issues. That also means navigating and creating an administrative structure so that federal and state funds are coming into the state and being leveraged so that the services that you need to make a difference for these kids' lives before we create a situation where the only option is adult correctional systems, which happens if you don't have these interventions. This justice led that effort in the state of New Mexico. And lastly, she's no stranger to child well-being, child advocacy, the legislature, state government, public service, public commitment, dedication to serving others. And while I know that she deserves a rest and retirement, New Mexico deserves this kind of leadership, and so does this department. So without further ado, and before we do questions, congratulations. And it's an honor to present this appointment to Children, Youth, and Families, Justice Barbara Vigil. Justice.
Thank you, Governor, for your confidence and for the appointment to serve as Cabinet Secretary of Children, Youth, and Families Department. I look forward to this challenge, and as you mentioned, this is a huge responsibility that I am prepared to undertake and to succeed. I have to say that the health and well-being of our children is critical to our future. And it is our responsibility in government to ensure that we serve them and we enable them to make wise choices when they're vulnerable so that they may become healthy and contributing members of New Mexico. This is no easy task, and yet it's something that I am fully prepared to undertake. My work in this area has been for 3 decades. I'm born and raised in New Mexico, and I have long-standing relationships throughout the state. I was born in Albuquerque, and I attended Catholic school as a young girl, and I lost my mother at the age of 12, and that experience resulted in my family having to be separated. So I bring to this job a real understanding of how the challenges that an adversity presents to families who are separated. And I think that understanding will enable me to come to the table with a perspective of service and understanding that the decisions that we make in government about children and how we protect them and ensure that they're safe is made with the utmost transparency and with the utmost commitment to their well-being. And as you mentioned, Governor, for 30 years I served as a child advocate, as a lawyer. I served as a children's court judge in the 1st Judicial District. And then I served as a Chief Justice of the New Mexico Supreme Court. And as you mentioned, I did recently step down from that role, and I am looking to pivot to this responsibility for New Mexico, and I am thrilled about doing it. This is my passion, my love for service, for public service, and for children and families. I can't tell you how honored I am to be here with you and to serve you and New Mexico going forward. And my vision for this work, for this position, is really to say that we must strive always to do the best we possibly can for our kids. And while we may not always get it right, we must demonstrate the dedication, the honor, the integrity, and the hard work to make their lives better. And I vouch, I promise, to do all I can to serve New Mexico in this capacity and to bring everything I know and everything I believe in for our beautiful state and move forward. Thank you, Governor, for your confidence in me, and I'm happy to answer any questions that might be presented.
Well, how about a congratulations to the Chief Justice. And before we take questions, and I want to make sure, this is Deputy Secretary Terry Locke of Children, Youth, and Families. This is also Mariana Padilla, who neither of them should be strangers to the media. Mariana runs the Children's Cabinet, which is a collective of all of the departments. There's not a single department that doesn't have a role, responsibility, funding stream. Both these individuals will be critical as we have a transition forward, and wanted to make sure that you all got to talk to all of us collectively today. Questions? Yes?
When you take on this role, what do you see as the biggest challenge that this department is facing, and what's your top priority?
That's a very good question. I think the first and foremost task that I will undertake is really understanding all the challenges that the department faces. And as the governor has mentioned, we are making strides, or the governor has made strides in improving the lives of children and families during her administration. I want to continue that, but also understand the challenges faced by the frontline workers in ensuring that kids are being healthy, that they're safe, that they have adequate ability to grow. So while I will undertake this job, I have a lot to investigate and to assess. And so I will do my utmost between now and day one of when I start to really go out and visit with the various offices and see what the challenges are, and then present a plan to the governor that I believe will continue to build on the strengths and tackle the weaknesses of the department. So that's really my goal at this time.
Yes.
So you personally said that you had personal experience with this department, and I know you touched on it a little bit, but would you mind elaborating more on how you're going to use that personal experience?
Sure. Let me clarify. No, I have not had personal experience with the department. What I'd like to say is at the age of 12, my mother passed away, and my father, who had 5 daughters and 1 son, sent his daughters to St. Catherine's a boarding school here in Santa Fe, to live. And it was that experience of separation from our family unit that has informed me and taught me the impact that a family separation can have on one in developing and growing. So it's that. It wasn't that we had any sort of contact with the department, but it was that experience that taught me that adversity can cause many challenges for families to address, and it was in that experience that I will bring better insight perhaps to leading this department, who is responsible for assessing families and determining the best course of action moving forward.
And if I can add, I was unaware of this story, Justice. You know, that kind of empathy when families are faced with any number of really tough decisions, whether they are brought directly by the department or the department is engaged because there are at-risk issues in a family that's lost both parents or grandparents, which this happens. We have grandparents raising grandchildren, any number of reasons, including that parents can be incarcerated. Let's say it's one grandparent. Let's say that grandparent falls and breaks a hip. This happens all too frequently, or has a stroke. That primary caregiver is in a long-term health setting. The state has to be available to provide the support and services and foster care environment, if you will, temporarily. I think that empathy about what a family has to go through and to get it right is pretty critical, and that makes me even prouder of the justice's willingness to serve in this role. Because having those personal connections are both meaningful, but they're hard. It is hard to continue to expose yourself to, these are going to be the toughest situations, which I know you dealt with 16,000 times plus in your career as a judge, where the most extraordinary family situations and some of the most horrific abuses are presented to you in that regard, and it takes a toll. And to have folks that have lived it, can do it, can make decisions about it, I think may be the most beneficial leadership effort in the history of the state in this particular department. Thank you for your willingness.
Thank you, Governor.
Absolutely.
Governor, how much does the whistleblower lawsuit have to do with what's going on here today?
You know, it doesn't, but I think it's an important issue where you're correct in at least leaning, I'm going to call it leaning into that aspect. I was concerned about a number of administrative missteps, including the department using Signal, which I don't believe at all was intended to be non-transparent or to alleviate our responsibility to have public records available to anyone who requests them, unless they are absolutely protected and they are confidential by statute. Those are issues for any leader to start to take a look at a department. But I also want to say, and I gave those descriptions at the front end, this department is making incredible strides. I want everything. I think New Mexicans, as a New Mexican, we deserve everything right. And Secretary Blalock stepped down because his wife has an incredible opportunity for another job somewhere else. And like we're seeing, not just COVID, but COVID's really shed an incredible light. A, if you're in public service, it's a very challenging time. Two, people are reassessing what their own career and personal goals are. And I've made certainly no secret of, these are hard jobs. And they do take some reflection, and I expect that folks are clear about the risks in some of their decisions, and that they need to limit and be very clear about that, and to focus on the vision and the priorities at hand. So those were concerning to me. I think that whistleblower lawsuit is likely to indicate that we did nothing wrong in the procurement, but the reality is the management of these issues seems to be, it could have been better in my view. And we'll wait and see what happens with that lawsuit. But that's what I believe is likely to occur based on what I know currently, but I can't speak about litigation. And that's sort of where I think we're postured, and we'll have to wait and see what an independent fact finder has to say about that.
Is there a reason why he's not here right now?
He's on vacation. That is why he's not here. I'm correct about that, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm just making sure it wasn't sick leave, but that's the only reason. Otherwise, he would be here.
So will he be back in office at this point before?
He'll be back just for a couple of days. We're winding up. You know, one thing, as a secretary who had to leave a secretarial post and then come back to a secretarial post and a change in administrations, and then in administration, leave a secretary post and move to a different secretary post, there's some movement that occurs in every administration. This one's no different. Frankly, if you did the review, we're about the same as any administration, and that's with a pandemic, which I'm proud of that public service. And, you know, I refer to my cabinet as a whole huge team of rock stars, and we're leading the country in a number of places. Look no further than Secretary Gerginski in universal early childhood and having the best child care benefits now in the country, all the way to Secretary Kinney, who may be the only environment secretary recognized ever by a U.S. Surgeon General for their role in making businesses as safe as possible and making New Mexicans safe in a pandemic. So pretty incredible. And I want to make sure that we do one more thing. It's a very important question that you've asked, is I don't do enough, and you're giving me an opportunity. So I'm really proud of the Office of the Governor. We are very involved, but we don't want to micromanage. I need leaders who will lead. Clearly, I don't need to demonstrate the leadership qualities of this incredible candidate. But in addition, there are state employees that you don't get to see, that you don't get to meet, that I got to highlight some of those faces that nobody ever saw before at an Isotopes game last night, who show up every single day, including at CYFD, and just do this work. But that's the only reason that Secretary Blalock is not here. But it was a mutually agreed upon decision. New opportunity for a spouse, and time for us to think about ways to do even more in that department. It's both. But the lawsuit was not an issue that caused that. It's everything else. And we'll see how that turns out. But again, I appreciate that the state has to be mindful of these issues, and we will do everything that we're required to do, and the fact finder is going to make that ultimate decision.
Thank you.
Yep.
The Secretary designate just mentioned your commitment to utmost transparency. So maybe for both of you, going forward, since this is a new beginning, what does that mean for this agency? You just signed an accountability law that will let people bring civil rights suits against this agency. So how is that going to be effective?
Morgan, it's a really important question. I mean, this is a department, and then I'll go right to the justice. I think that government workers, not just first responders and public safety or police officers, have to be accountable when they're clearly acting outside of their agency or outside of their protocol and there's real harm. We should be accountable for that, and we're fully prepared to recognize that that is a likelihood in a variety of our high-risk departments, corrections, CYFD, HSD, DOH. Now, I hope that we don't have any of those incidents in state government. The fact that we need a law to make sure that New Mexicans have that credibility, transparency, and accountability should certainly suggest to every New Mexican that I believe that with 20,000 employees and really significant issues, there can be issues that we're going to have to deal with. And I expect the Secretary to be open, transparent, that she does everything that she can do to train and support her staff to not make mistakes, to not be careless, to not have issues, and to bring forward risks that we can mitigate on the front end. But if we don't, and if we have an issue, I'm going to support this team to improve those systems. But earnestly, I wouldn't have signed the bill if I didn't think that it was warranted and that there needed to be broader protections to New Mexicans. And I think that is an indication that we are fearless about that transparency, even when Transparency can mean that you have to talk about some of the issues, failures potentially, or mistakes that state government or even our relationships with the private sector that we make. We want New Mexicans to know that we are, our job is to do better and better and better, and we do every day. But perfect is a hard standard, and even though I'm leaning in for perfection, I'm willing to be held accountable when we can't get there.
If I
Yeah,
may,
please.
Governor, yes, I totally agree with the governor's explanation that it is certainly our responsibility to be accountable in the processes and procedures that are implemented in doing this work with the utmost goal of protecting children and keeping them safe. Now, there's a layer of confidentiality that must go along with protecting those children who are vulnerable, that investigations are proceeding. So in balancing the requirement for protecting their identity and making sure that they're treated with the utmost deference, we also must be open and responsible to the public with respect to how we investigate and the processes that we follow to make sure that we are carrying forward the public trust. And it's that is transparent. That this is how we do business. This is how, these are the standards that we will hold ourselves to. And we will do all we can to do that. So I think there's that balance of confidentiality, but also making sure that our processes are in accordance with the law and that demonstrate a clear commitment to serving not only the vulnerable children that come before us, but also the families and the communities in which they live.
Yes.
So, Governor, this is your about third secretary announcement in the last 2 weeks, and earlier you mentioned you wanted to fill those holes on the front line. Can we get an update on when you're going to fill secretary positions for the health department and the workforce solutions?
So those two might be actually longer, but expect that some of the others are right around the corner. And I'll tell you why. In respecting those frontline workers at the Department of Health, having a sense of stability for a while as they reassess both their other public health priorities, right? Gun violence is an epidemic, suicide issues both for our youth and adult population, drug issues, and our mitigation and prevention strategies, including harm reduction, and I'm not hitting them all. Teen pregnancy, all of those public health issues, obesity and public health wellness and promotion, all of that has been moving forward, but clearly in kind of a backseat environment given the pandemic. And public health is the smallest component of the Department of Health. Right? We have 7 facilities. We're responsible for the developmentally disabled waiver. We have a supportive services waiver. We have a medically fragile children's waiver. We have other related programs in that department that are very complicated and complex. And what they want, and Dr. Scrace is willing to do, right, is to provide that, because they're spending, that department, frankly, is melded pretty closely now with the Medicaid department or the Human Services Department through the pandemic, and we're not through. So I want that stability, and I want to create an environment for the next health secretary to be able to have all of that moving in the way that it should. I mean, I know it's not a surprise or a secret, and I'm very, incredibly proud. We led the nation in many, if not all aspects of COVID at one time or another, without having all of those frontline workers in place and not having any of those systems in our state for a number of reasons, which we've all discussed before, right? Old federal rules that don't allow us to invest in healthcare, being a rural and frontier and poor state, all of that, and being a sick and older state. All those basically told every other researcher, New Mexico's going to have the most deaths per capita. They're never going to get a hold of this pandemic. They'll never get their testing done. They'll just won't be able to do it. And none of that was true. This department did that. Human Services did that. We did that with the private sector, but it was incredible work. And I respect the request. Let us just get everything going, because each leader brings their own style. So they want to do that, and I'm perfectly willing, of course, to support that environment. So expect that one to be later. And the same with Workforce Solutions. I'm very involved. We're hitting those marks that I promised we would do. We're about to have dashboards that will allow you to see how we're doing on our investigations, what's going on with fraud, what's going on with recoupment, how we're doing with answering our phone calls. All of that is improving every day. And as important, or frankly for me, more importantly, is to make sure people are ready to go back to work, and we're moving folks productively out of an unemployment environment and into their work and career environments. So I want the management team, right, to keep doing that, because if you interrupt it, that has its own set of challenges. All the other vacancies, we are right there, and we'll be inviting you potentially, or at least giving you the information about who's been appointed.
And do you have dates for those dashboards for Workforce Solutions? Because we've ran a few stories about people not being able to contact them. Do we have a timeline?
We do. Yesterday. So Chief Operating Officer Casados, get me those ASAP, or that's, I was going to make fun of her, but she's incredible. You will be shocked to know that we had those 2.5, 3 weeks ago, and I wanted them changed. I thought they were hard to read, and it's complicated information, which we've talked about before, and there were a lot of footnotes, and I need something that all of us can see sort of exactly the way that you do with vaccines and cases. What does the data look like? Is it easily transferable, right, to public consumption so that we can see what's going on? And I'm very interested, if people still aren't getting through, because our data shows that it is working. There are some challenges on Mondays and Tuesdays. That's when folks are calling, and the numbers are like 3 times as high. I want that addressed immediately. So anything that we can do, and please refer, I know that you want to run your stories. That's not to tell you not to run them, but rather we want to know who folks are, because that's how we can make the system work better for every New Mexican. And we're going to make the changes to the IT system. I went through it myself. It is antiquated. I don't know. It takes far too long, and it doesn't have to be that way. And I can tell you that the call center is humming, and those changes are likely to find their ways into every single call center in the state of New Mexico, so that we're doing our work in that regard. You might remember that health was challenged by their health center as well. We're going to improve those systems. And when you don't invest in any of our IT or call centers or any of that administrative work in state government for 15 years, it's not an excuse. It's just, this is the kind of risk that we're supposed to always be building against. And then, of course, it happens, and people are absolutely upset. And I hope it's a really strong message to our partners and our policymakers. We can't take for granted those core public service aspects of government ever again and let them fall behind. Yes, sir.
Moving back to today's announcement, would you please share with us how this all unfolded? When did Secretary Blalock inform you that he was leaving, and was Justice Vigil your sort of first call?
I don't know that I can do that as productively as I need to. That'll it'd be an indication that at 61, sometimes it's a day-by-day situation. So. It is absolutely true, I'll embarrass the justice, that even before maybe your public announcement, so that means I didn't know she was retiring, I was interested in her work in a number of ways. You might recall that I was in a leadership position with the Biden administration to identify the most dynamic, capable, smart, effective New Mexicans that they ought to be looking for. And I certainly reached out to Justice Vigil, and she's a very good secret keeper, that I think if there was ever a chance for her to talk to any of those folks, I would be so incredibly honored and proud, right, to promote her as one of those incredible New Mexicans. Right? Every governor, but my job in particular on the transition team, every governor is supposed to do that. Highlight all the people that you know can make a difference in federal government. That's part of our job. So I certainly reached out. I don't know that she was expecting me to disclose that today, so you're welcome. That's how it works now with the press. And then I kept talking to her about children's issues and about her advice for our entire cabinet. I think that's also an indication, I hope, of good leadership. I know a good thing when I know a good thing, and to reach out and to ask for advice. You certainly probably saw Justice Vigil supported Secretary Blalock and the department in a number of legislative activities. What can we do better? Some of those hearings were really hard. How do I address those? And then lastly, the minute she retired, I've been putting a bug in her ear that the state needs her. And that I would really be honored if she would entertain being in this administration. In the last couple of weeks, Secretary Blalock identified that his spouse had an incredible job opportunity and he was going to step down. So it sort of collided together, but sometimes those collisions are an indication that everything's coming together in the way that certainly I was leaning into for them to come together.
Governor, I'm sorry to interrupt. You got time for maybe 2-3 more.
Okay.
Got one quick one. I think, wanted to ask, I think a lot of New Mexicans, when they think of CYFD, think of Omari, Varela, and some of those other really heartbreaking cases. Wanted to ask, hopefully now coming out of the pandemic with child abuse issues, things like that, maybe being harder to detect, kind of what are some of your thoughts on hopefully trying to avoid those type of situations going forward?
Sure, if I may, Governor, it's a matter of ensuring that we have enough resources at the front lines to ensure that we're investigating any suspicion of child abuse and following through with that. And I think that the department has made great strides in improving that process under Secretary Blalock, and I intend to continue that effort with the department.